not really what we want to do. And we talk about, as groups, a lot, whether or not it makes sense to fund Planned Parenthood or NASA or the post office, but all those things cost in millions or low billions of dollars. We're talking, 15, 16 trillion dollars of debt right now that we're in, and the deficit's projected to run another $1 trillion deficit next year. So I really think in some cases a sledgehammer is necessary, and there are huge departments who need to be cutting entirely.
I would certainly add that I think the debt is a huge threat. Debt in and of itself is not the end of the world, but when it rises to a dangerous level, it can crowd out a lot of investment and cause a bunch of problems. But we do have to be mindful of the commitments we've made to people in terms of current recipients of Social Security and Medicare and things like that. People who pay these taxes for their lifetimes and were expecting and planning on getting this money. So there is a certain extent that we need to be mindful that I agree that we don't leave people to suffer. But we do need to attack this problem from the stance of major fundamental reform to major programs, specifically Social Security and Medicare and how we handle healthcare in general.
I think you saw a lot of courage on this topic in Congress for a brief period last summer. And I think you saw a lot of Democrats, certainly not the unanimous opinion of the party, but a lot of people come together on entitlements, led by Senator Warner among them. Really talking seriously about entitlement reform and the way to do it. And I think a lot of Democrats, including Warner, would agree that there are certain aspects of villainization of reform in that area. But I think the same thing is also happening with tax increases, where you had some really moderate folks come together on some slight revenue adjustments, 5-to-1 deals, 6-to-1 deals. These were not extreme measures, and it was just tough to get any traction on that. So I think a balanced approach, even if it does tilt towards spending reductions, would still be a responsible approach. But the reason I brought out this idea of the scalpel approach is one of those lines we're talking about that is JMU's federal aid, Pell Grants. And I think it's tough to look at a group of students and say that we're going to take a sledgehammer to your Pell Grant. I just think that's irresponsible in a time when we're being out-competed by the rest of the world and out-educated by the rest of the world to look at groups like that and act like these things aren't essential investments in our future as a country. So I think it is important to remember that dollars you're taking away are dollars that are being used in a lot of cases to do really good work. I mean, I think a lot of the students here on Pell Grants that wouldn't be here without them would agree. So I think that's just kind of a brief approach to our position.
I think we can all agree that government spending is far beyond what we would like. But I do agree with Dan's approach that you can't just take a sledgehammer, a metaphorical sledgehammer, to mandatory spending, even though it's what is the largest portion of our federal budget, because this is people's livelihood. And as Dan already said, discretionary spending is already on the brink of making this country not safe for us. I'm sure not enough people want that.
Hi, my name is Matt. I'm a senior. Yeah, what we're talking about is that 4 straight years the government has spent more than $1 trillion than what it had in. And that number is unfathomable. No one except scientists of outer space even use that number. Mathematicians don't use it because it's so big, no one can imagine it. And if I gave you $1 trillion and said, spend this in the next 100 years, you could never do it. That would be spending $10 billion a year for the next 100 years. That's buying the LA Lakers 10 times every single year. The money's not sustainable. The spending was never sustainable. And so that's what we have. Even if we cut $1 trillion, then we're still, if we break even, we still have a $16 trillion national debt that's only rising. Barack Obama, since his inauguration in 2009, has spent more money than all presidents from George Washington to President Clinton combined. The amount of money we're spending was never sustainable. The programs we have, Social Security, was never meant to be something that people could live on. It was supposed to be just like a nice supplement, something that you could put aside for, for bonus spending. The programs we have, the government is involved in absolutely everything. The spending is out of control. You probably can't name a single thing you could do in your day-to-day lives that the federal government is not involved with. Anything from screwing in a light bulb to flushing the toilet, the government has their hands in it, and it's costing you money. And people always look at that and say they don't really see how it's hurting them. Well, $16 trillion later, I think we can all see how it's hurting them.
All right, I would add to that. I agree with everything Matt said. It's also important to note that the true burden of government is not what it taxes, but what it spends. The government ultimately taxes what it spends in the long run. And so right now, you could say taxes are at a record high, because federal government spending as a share of the economy is about 25%. And when Bill Clinton left office, it was 18%. And during his presidency, it fell gradually. It was the smallest drop in government spending since the 1920s. In the 90s, the economy and the middle class did very well during that time. So I think we can replicate at least going back to federal government spending, which would be $1 trillion less to get it back to about 18% of GDP. And we definitely need to look at that. And also, there's a huge economic impact from running these $1 trillion deficits. First, like Matt said, they're unprecedented. These deficits are larger than anything in U.S. history, excluding during World War II. Also, the $1 trillion that government spends taking out of private credit markets. If you ever hear people say, I can't get a loan, businesses aren't getting money, I can't get a fund just forever. Well, one of the reasons that government is taking that money, government is robbing the private lending markets of credit. And so businesses can't expand and go with their ideas. And so we're really costing a lot of potential technological breakthroughs by distorting capital markets.
Can I ask a follow-up question real quick? Just to follow to that, you said you were comfortable with 1990s spending levels. Are you comfortable with those revenue levels as well from 1990s? There's two parts to the equation.
Well, the government ultimately taxes what it spends. So you can cut taxes for sure, but the thing is, with like in the 90s, the stock market was in a bubble, and the revenues were coming in so fast that even government couldn't spend it, and so that's why we had a temporary surplus. But I would want revenues to come down for sure.
So you would be comfortable in the short term with 1990 revenue level?
Well, we measure by what?
Individual income tax.
By as a percentage of GDP, or how much?
But the rate that you paid on your income.
Oh, like a tax rate?
Yeah, the individual tax rate that we had in the 90s. That you're talking about being such a prosperous time, and to make sure you're consistent on that.
No, yeah, taxes were higher then, for sure, but spending was lower.
So we need both.
What? No, I would prefer prefer spending to be lower, but yeah, taxes were higher in the 90s, but also global taxes were a lot higher. Over the past 20 years, global taxes, our economic competitors have been slashing their rates, so that's another reason why higher taxes would be more disadvantaged.
All right, it's been almost 10 minutes. Working hard over here. So we're going to move on to our next question. When running for president, Barack Obama said he wouldn't use federal resources to interfere with states that have legalized medical marijuana. So, especially recently, the DEA has continued to raid and has kind of amped up the raiding of legal dispensaries. What is your club's position on this issue, both specifically medical marijuana and the war on drugs in general?
Okay, fantastic. The first thing about the DEA raids that I think is important to note is that the president has, the executive branch has given line items and budgets to perform certain functions. And this is the thing Nixon ran into, this is the thing Clinton ran into. There's a lot of things you get money for that you don't like, and you got to spend it. And I think there's a clash of campaign promises and implementation. All these things are line items that conflict. This was something from the 1978 Budget Control Act. These are things that you see that have been worked through the congressional process in terms of making laws that make executives spend money. So I think that's part of the problem. In terms of medical marijuana, I think that the approach that's been taken by our president in terms of letting states decide, I think there's a misconception that somehow the Democratic Party is a top-down view of federalism, when in reality on things like education, on health, and in this case, he's really open about two-state decision-making on gay rights. He's open to the states. So I think there's a misconception in terms of perceived role of the federal government across parties, but I think I'm certainly supportive of the idea of letting states make a decision on medical marijuana, but as long as there's appropriated money from the DEA, it's a conflict and there's not spending money Congress gives.
I agree with everything Dan said. I think that that leaving it up to the states is, at this point in time, the most effective way to
I'm sorry, I just noticed the war on drugs piece as well. I think the war on drugs has been a colossal failure.
I think we
No, expand upon that.
we can all agree that the war on drugs was not as successful as it was meant to be.
Excuse me. I think we could have a very illuminating conversation about the role of federalism and how it relates to substances that are currently illicit under federal law. But I think before we were to do any of that, we would have to completely revamp the welfare state that we currently have. Because if we were to legalize all these types of drugs that libertarian types want to legalize, we would still have the welfare state intact, where when these people can't get a job or can't do anything, we're still stuck with the bill. I mean, right now we're funding drug use for people while also keeping it illegal. So to be completely honest, I would open the discussion to allowing states to make certain decisions about drugs, but first we would have to completely overhaul the welfare system that we currently have. Because if we're going to make them all illegal, you're legalizing the ability to do drugs while making the consequences for those actions illegal. It's illegal for you to have a personal consequence for doing drugs if you're still allowed to be on the welfare state. If we're still giving you food and housing and shelter and all this stuff, you're getting all the benefits and all the whatever you get out of doing LSD or pot or whatever you want to do without letting you also deal with the consequences. So I think it's a two-step solution if we're going to talk about revamping the drug code we currently have.
Yeah, Matt makes some good points. Legalizing drugs would definitely bring down the price, and typically a lower price increases demand. So maybe the only problem I can think of from legalizing drugs would be an increase in usage. But that in itself is in its own category, because that person has chosen themselves to be that victim. They voluntarily decided that's best for their life. So I don't know if it's really good for government to intervene, because in order for government to intervene, it then has to impose costs on third parties to obtain the resources to keep somebody from doing something to themselves. And also just a historical background on the war on drugs. It was actually the Democrat Party that made all these drugs illegal, coming out of like the socialist progressive movement. And in 1914, it was Woodrow Wilson that made cocaine and heroin illegal. FDR in the 1930s made marijuana illegal. And in the 1960s, it was Kennedy and Johnson that made LSD and mushrooms illegal. So the Republican Party didn't even really jump onto this war on drugs until Richard Nixon, and that was when they started getting more influence with like the faith-based initiatives.
I think that as libertarians, we do feel very strongly that you should have the right to put into your body whatever you want without the government's interference. And the Republicans make a true point that the welfare system would be supporting people that chose to use drugs and whose health suffered from that. But they don't take into account that right now we're paying to put all those people in jail, which is extremely expensive. And a lot of those people, I think that a lot of us can agree that drug-related arrests are oftentimes racially motivated. And I mean, I feel like that's an attack on a lot of people that, I mean, at JMU, I think we can tell that that's definitely the case.
Yeah, I don't really think that the welfare state should be an obstacle to legalization. Obviously, when you're giving people, well, we call it, when you're giving people free money, I mean, they're going to spend it as they like, and they might make choices with it that you don't necessarily approve of. So if you have a problem with that, you tackle that as its own issue. When it comes to the drug war, we mentioned what an expensive failure it is. Everybody mentions that. But I'm not really content to give Obama a pass just because of the situation with the line item veto. I mean, the DEA is rapidly out of control, and the efforts that we've used, with federal enforcement of drug stuff, what it does is it trickles down really the sort of militarization of police forces. And we've kind of even, you can almost feel that in Harrisonburg, the sort of level of, and the war on terror contributes to this as well with the Patriot Act and other things like that. So we need to think of the war on drugs, not just in terms of the rights and protections of people who are using, and not just in terms of what the taxes mean to us, but also in terms of the threats it poses to us and the safety of our own communities when we have basically SWAT teams with free license roaming around breaking in to whoever's house that they please.
I think it's good here that we all kind of agreed that a step to any drug program is also the idea of getting people out of poverty. And we have different methods of how we might want to do it, but I think it's important to recognize that these social problems go hand in hand, and I think we all have a commitment here to getting people out of poverty. I'm glad to hear that part of the conversation. One point of clarity, my family was on TANF for 3 years, and there wasn't a whole lot of money left over for coke. And I don't think it's a good characterization of folks on TANF to act